All right. Hello, team.
Hello.
Hello.
We've got people all over today. It looks like Jovita's the sole person in the office today.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. I think my background gives it away that I'm not technically in the office. So I thought we'll give people a few minutes here to come in. Everyone's usually a little bit late to join. But while we do that, why don't we go around and we can maybe introduce ourselves and maybe mention if there's an Olympic sport that you've been enjoying watching. So we were actually talking about the Olympics here before we started. And I know, Chris, you were in the middle of talking about how much you were enjoying it. So why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Chris. I'm an expert here at Safe. I've been around for 3 years. And honestly, when it comes to the Olympics, I love almost all sports. The most interesting for me are always the sprints, whether it's the track sprints or swimming. I find them, they're just so thrilling to watch. So that'd be my favorite.
Nice.
Pass it off to Jovita, because I think she's next on my screen.
Hello, I am Jovita. I am a desktop expert. I haven't been following the Olympics as closely. I haven't been watching anything live, partly because of the time zone difference, but I've been kind of catching up on secondhand news. And my favorite image so far is a group of, I think, the American curling team, and the caption just says, "It looks like a group of dads away on the weekend," and somehow ended up at the Olympics and winning. So I thought that was really cute.
Mark, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Mark Stokes. I'm with the FME application experts, mostly supporting desktop. For me, I think any sport that doesn't really get a good forum in some other championship, like, tennis is widely shown in other areas. So those athletes that don't really get a highlight somewhere else, I think is what really I like to watch. So actually, I was watching the ball voting last night. Holy smokes, that was super exciting with a young Swedish 21-year-old making a crack at the world record. That was really tense. Yeah.
The Olympics are so much fun.
Maybe people on the audience can chime in and tell us what.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to try something crazy here. I've never done this before, but I was attending a different webinar and this happened. I'm going to attempt to give everyone in the audience a chance to unmute themselves, and we'll just do it for a second because it's going to be chaos. But if you want to shout out what your favorite Olympic event is, let's give it a try. Okay, here we go. Unmute all attendees. I think I'm going to go ahead and click the button. You're not just going to be unmuted randomly. I think it'll give you the option, but let's see what happens. Okay. Now everyone should have the option here to unclick like the little mute button and go ahead and just chime in what your favorite Olympic event is.
Burgess, any bicycle sport.
Any
Hockey.
bicycle sport. Hockey. Excellent.
Summer Olympics.
Not summer, technically.
There's field hockey.
Oh yeah, that's true. No, you're right.
There's both.
Yeah. Okay, I will.
Volleyball.
Yes.
Volleyball or beach volleyball? Or both?
Beach volleyball.
That's incredible. Beach volleyball is obviously an exhausting sport because you're not only running and jumping, but it's all in sand at the same time. So.
I know. I've tried walking in sand before and it's exhausting. Never mind jumping and running. I don't know how these people do it. Okay, I'm going to leave this up for another second. Go ahead and shout over me if you want to while I introduce myself. I'm Stephanie. I help out here on our webinars, and I'm just going to be helping keeping things running smoothly. So we do have the option if anyone wants to raise their hand to come on the air and ask a question. I will go on and bring you on just like this with us, and you can come chat. But other than that, I'm going to be behind the scenes and leaving it to the experts here, Chris, Jovita, and Mark. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute the audience again. So now if you guys want to come online, you're going to have to raise your hand. But it does look like we already have a hand raised. So maybe I will kick it off and see if we can get Krishna to come online with us. Make panelist. Okay. Here we go. And my favorite Olympic event is, I always like the equestrian because I have a horse, but the skateboarding this year has been really fun to watch because the kids are like 13 years old and they're unbelievable. So that's been kind of a fun thing to see.
And that's a first this year too, right? I think skateboarding is a new event, so.
It is,
Yeah,
and I saw on NBC they have, I think, Tony Hawk helping commentate, which is kind of cool.
awesome.
Um, okay, Krisha, I'm not sure if we are getting luck to get you to come online, but go ahead and type in your question if it doesn't work to actually unmute. It doesn't look like it's working for you. So with that, all right, I'm going to pass it over to you, to the three of you, and if anyone else wants to raise their hand, I'll come on and help you come on the air.
And one of the things from our point of view that we would like to learn from our audience as well is what kind of struggles you face, whether using FME or not, when you have to validate data. So if anybody wants to throw in their thoughts into the chat or the questions, please do that, because we always want to know what areas of validation people are working on. So we got one question pop up. How do we check ESRI GeoDatabase domain validation from Carol? So what think you're asking there is you have to load in the domain codes when you're working with FME, or you can work with the domain descriptions. And so how do you validate that the descriptions or the codes going in actually match the domains that are defined within your ESRI GeoDatabase? I think that's correct, Carol. So really the best way to do that is to build a lookup table within FME, and then use something like the database joiner to join to a lookup table. So you can put those domain lists in a spreadsheet and then just look them up. And if you put it in a spreadsheet, then it's easy to maintain. We actually have a workspace somewhere that if you export your geodatabase schema as an ESRI XML workspace document, that's what they call it, then FME can use the XML reader to dig out the domain lists, and that's how you could build that lookup table for yourself. So that's one way of doing it. If you don't validate the domains and you throw in a bad domain, I think that feature gets rejected. Hopefully that answers your question. Any others there that came in, guys? So one's got a difficult question to answer. The question is, any tips on checking roads for road range overlaps? For example, Main Street, which is next to where I live, if I have an address range of 100 to 198, that overlaps with the address ranges 150 to 220. So that would presumably be an invalid address range. And so how would we do that? I'm not quite sure what would be the best way to do that. I think that would actually be fairly tricky. We have something, I think we could use a trick within the tools like Attribute Creator, Attribute Manager, where you can check adjacent features. And so you could check the end range from the previous feature against the start range of the current feature and see whether one is greater than the other, and that would be the way to do that. So that's, Chris, you said you were going to have FME up. Maybe could you just pop up
Yeah, for sure.
Attribute Creator and show at least where that is? Maybe not demo the answer to that question, but because that would be fairly complicated, but just show where in the Attribute Creator you expose that adjacent feature.
I'm just gonna close this bookmark down. That's just for Attribute Validator if we need to come across that. So let's just put a creator down and an Attribute Manager. That's my favorite one. And as Mark was mentioning, yeah, there's that advanced attribute value handling. So this is where you can kind of set in the enable adjacent features here. So you can tell it to look for, say, the first or the previous and the next feature, or if you need to look 10 beyond or whatever the value is, you can kind of tell FME to make it accessible that way. When you look in the text editor, then you'll see if you drop down the feature attributes, let's make that a little bit bigger. This is where you can kind of do all those compares and see, okay, this is going back 7 features. If I scroll down, there'll be a +7, go forward 7 features. So that would be how you handle it.
Pre-processing step, you could also sort them first, so you can actually have useful adjacent features to take a look at. I think there's also some attribute range type transformers. I haven't used them personally, but that might be something that you'd be interested in taking a look at.
Yeah, Javita brings up a really important point there, and that is order is critical in that case. So yeah, you would definitely need to use a sorter to make sure the order is correct. Otherwise, you'd be looking kind of at random features potentially. So. All right. Is there anything else we wanted to show in here, Mark?
No, that's great. Thanks very much. Hopefully that points you in the right direction there. So you've got some tips on where to go. You can always contact one of us. I think maybe we should chat our email addresses later on in there, so that people can hit us up for later on if they want some follow-up, or just ask for some follow-up in the questions, and we can do that for you.
Yeah, definitely. We also we'll send out a follow-up email as well, and if anyone wants additional help on it, you can always reach out to us there. But yeah, I can chat out maybe some emails here. There's definitely a ton of ways to get a hold of us.
Greg's got one here. I often get grief from non-ASCII characters like the degree symbol or things like that. Holy smokes, I don't know how to validate for that. You guys got any ideas on that?
I have got one. I love the string replacer. You can use a regular expression and filter all of these ASCII characters out, limit it to only like A to Z, but it's just such a powerful transformer that you can do a lot of filtering within one transformer itself. So check out the string replacer. For specific characters like the degree symbol, if that's the only one that's giving you grief, in that particular data set, you can use just the degree symbol. So instead of using regular expression, you can replace the text, and you can replace it with nothing, or you can replace it with something else.
I think adding on that too, there's a couple of degree formatting transformers on the FME Hub that I have used in the past. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but I'll do a quick search for them. I think they do just that, where it's essentially doing the same thing as the string replacer, just bundled up already for you. So depending on what you need to do with that, if you just type degree on the canvas, it'll show up with all the hub transformers. So we'll just see, yeah, there's the decimal degrees calculator, which was a little bit of a different one, but there's also the DMS to decimal degrees converter and one called the degrees formatter. So that one I think could potentially cover that use case for you.
And there's two very closely related questions here, I think, that we can probably try and answer at the same time. How can we check the CAD layer names? I think it means how do we check the CAD layer names match the GeoDatabase layer names? And then there's a second kind of related question about schemas, really. What are the most versatile transformers for a beginner FME user to do schema comparisons ready for stats to run with R? I'm not sure about the stats part, but for schema comparisons, I assume you've got a source and target schema that you want to match. Well, actually, we're just doing some work on that, so I'm going to sell you some vaporware as a way of starting to answer that question. We are just adding, in the process of finalizing, actually, the development of transformer called the schema scanner. I think that will be in FME 21.2 or .3. And so that transformer will take your data and scan it and then produce a schema for you, give you the data types, the lengths of the fields, and so on. And so if you run that on your source of target data, or if you've got two source data sets and you want to make sure the schemas match, you can use that transformer. We also have on the feature reader the ability to give you back the schema that comes from the data set that you're working with. So you can compare those as well. So how to check whether your CAD layer names match your GeoDatabase layer names. You can use those tools, or similar to the question about domains, if you put the list of your database layers in a spreadsheet, then it's really easy to do a check using the database joiner. Any other ideas on that? It's a tricky question, that.
I have one. I wouldn't recommend it for multiple data sets, but if you're doing one kind of workspace translation check, what I've done in the past is use I think it's the attribute filter. You can import a schema from your GeoDatabase and then grab all of those names and then run your data set through it to check whether it filters correctly. And that's a quick way to glance at whether or not your input CAD layers matched your GeoDatabase layers.
Yeah, I'm actually just going to chat out. We actually showed a demo of exactly what Jovita is describing. It was her demo showing how to do that with the attribute filter. I'm fairly confident it was in that presentation. If it's not, I'll get the actual webinar that it originates from. And yeah, it's a very similar example, but that is kind of how it would be done.
It's a nice beginner-friendly one that kind of gives you an output that you can see where things matched or didn't match, whether instead of just like running into an error or something, it's a little bit friendlier.
So there's a great question here, which is always harder to answer than it seems. What's the difference between attribute, empty string, missing, and null? Anybody else want to take that on?
That is a good question. Well, null is an actual value, is it not? Missing would be if it's just nothing there. I think we can handle that regardless, because there is the null value mapper. So you can kind of combine, and if you have a combination of nulls, empties, and missing, you can kind of group all those together with the null attribute mapper and then define them all, or sorry, map them all to either missing, null, and empty string. Or if you want to write it out to a new value like not applicable, you could do it like that. I don't know if there's obviously a better definition out there, so I'm not sure if either of you have something to add.
Yeah, null is more of a database thing, but it does mean, I think technically it means I don't know what the value is, but it is actually a value, unknown. Empty string is just like a blank, so that's just, there was no value in there. And missing in the FME context is, well, the attribute isn't on the feature. Now, so how do you have an attribute that actually isn't on the feature? And that's really just a quirk of FME's workbenches, the way it handles schema. So you might have some features that have an attribute on them coming from one source data. You might be blending that with a second set of data, might not have the attribute. So on that second data set, that attribute, although it's on the workbench schema, is actually missing on the feature. So it is kind of an oddity in FME. So yeah, Chris was right there. It's the what did you say? Null attribute mapper, was it?
Yeah, let me get the actual name. Null attribute mapper, yeah. Yeah, again, just type it on the canvas, type null down, and you'll see it'll all pop up there. And then from there, just open up the parameters and choose which attributes you want to check for the null, missing, or empty strings. And then it's as simple as remapping those values.
I'm just hunting up to see if we have an article somewhere. I feel like somebody like Mark Ireland has defined the differences between them before, that would be a good reference. So if I find that, I will chat that out to us all.
I think there is a blog on that, Javita. I think you're right.
Yeah, here's the null attribute mapper. I'll just show it up on Workbench right now. So when you open up those parameters, I'll obviously need to connect it to something. I'll put a creator down. I'll pretend that's the rest of our workspace. You can set it to selected attributes. So if you only want to specify, say, I only want it with this creation instance one, or if you want it to look in every single one, you can kind of choose if you want null, empty, missing. We'll look for just the null and the missing, and we'll remap it to an empty string, like that. So quick and easy way to do that.
And if you'd like to know whether or not you have any missing nulls or empties, the tester has an operator that allows you to check for that as well.
Out here, and she's referring to these four. So yeah, couple ways you can handle that.
What about validating date values within the attribute validator transformer? I don't think that's in there yet, is it, Chris?
There was a comment on it earlier, but we can take a quick look. So we have, this is as of 2021.1. I think that might be in the beta potentially. No promises on that one. Please don't hold me to that. I know there is work coming on that, so I just don't know what build it's going to be released in. For now, there's the type one. I think you can look for date, time, type, but that's probably not what they're looking for.
Let's see if it's in 2022. So you think it's being added where, as we speak, a bit more vague?
I think there might be. I ran across something that was related to validating date times. I can't remember the full context of it, but I know there is work being done on it. So
yeah, otherwise you have to use a separate transformer like the date converter and try and convert the date, I think.
I know we just did a whole webinar on date times. I'm not sure if it would include that, but I can chat out the link for it anyway, because I can vouch that it was a good webinar.
Yeah, it's not in the newer builds yet, but
okay. Yeah, so I might have been crazy. If I heard something, it likely would have been from that webinar, because I did watch that recently. So I would go with whatever they say.
Nice. We'll chat that out.
yeah, so I think actually, I mean, there is a type date in, like Chris said, in the attribute validator, but that would validate against a FME date format, which is a very specific string. So if it matched that string, then that would be fine. So you would already have had to have converted your dates to that string, which kind of invalidates the idea of validating the date string. So the other option you have is complex regular expressions, I think.
Just a note, I think I have found the blog post for missing empty and nulls. I've just chatted it out in the chat.
Nice.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jovita.
So I'm going to pop up a really tricky one here, which is hard to answer. So the question is, my organization is a multi-team production chain, and the final output is GML, mostly from GeoPackages. And the GML end product is validated with the XML schema definition, which is an XSD document. Could we use an XSD document further up the translation chain so that it's not just right at the very end of the XML creation, but sort of along the way? I guess possibly validating the attribute types within the GeoPackage and maybe a source file GeoDatabase. So that's a tricky one, yes, because the XSD is very specific to XML. I don't think there's any way to do that directly. So I'm not sure whether Javita, you've done a little bit of XML work, but not too much. So no, I think the answer is no. You would have to take that XSD and convert it to a different kind of data structure for FME to be able to validate it earlier on. Make it more of a table format. So you had your list of attributes and your list of domains and layers. Put that in a spreadsheet and then validate that. One of the presentations that we could post up here, I think it's the City of Kitchener did some presentations on how to do that kind of work with external spreadsheets in one of the validation webinars that we've done in the past. So maybe I'll try and post up the link of that.
Nice. I think I've maybe found that one. I'll also say we do have a webinar upcoming about XML on August 26th. It's actually a repeat one, but Don and Dean are going to be on it live doing an XML-a-thon. So it's like an hour and a half of XML. And so if you have any more XML questions, that would be a great place to get them answered. I know Don and Dean live for that. So
Absolutely.
shout that out.
Yeah.
Great. I wonder, maybe a question for the audience here. What transformers do you use the most when it comes to data validation? What are some of your favorite go-tos? Just go ahead and chat it in. It is fun to see all the different answers that come in, because I know with FME there's different options for sure. We got the tester. String replacer, nice, Jovita. Maybe that's because you plugged it. Feature merger.
So that's an interesting use there, the feature merger. Maybe you can just expand on how you're using the feature merger there. I assume you're merging it with a schema definition or something. So that would be interesting to know how you're doing that.
I do see a hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and try and bring GIS Geospatial on the air with us. So hang on, invites coming your way. I also saw an answer for the feature joiner. All right, we're going to give and an unmute request. All right, I'm not sure, if GIS Geospatial is having any luck coming on the air. It looks like their mic maybe isn't working. You might, oh, hang on.
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, guys. This is very nice, and I really appreciate you guys for coming up with this. When I saw the invite yesterday, I was so happy, and I'm glad to be here. A quick one. So I'm some days, but I'm trying to load data from my computer to my ArcGIS online portal, and I was getting this feedback that file memory insufficient. So I troubleshoot and did everything I could do, but I couldn't resolve it. I thought if the issue is from my hand, I don't know how I could go about this. And my second question is, how can I store special character like less than or greater than in my database using FME?
Okay, so memory insufficient issue when
Let's
loading.
take on the database one first, the greater than, less than. Is that greater than, less than in a table name or an attribute name or as part of a data value?
It is actually in a table name, the content. So when you have a set of results and the results are in less than or greater than, and I want to store it even though in percentages. So I have a file GeoDatabase and I have the table, and the less than greater than is the content. And I've not been able to store. I've looked at the different data type like float, double, those stores, but I couldn't. It's not working. And I want the data to be stored with either less than or greater than, even the percentages. So when I try to store with percentage, it's only converted to fraction for me to store such data. Thank you. Over.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure I'm following the question, but if it's just a percentage number like 55%, I mean, that should just be the numeric data type. So if it's a numeric, you could just have a numeric of width of 6 with 2 decimal places, and that would give you 55.00 or something like that, I think. So that that should work. I think it's just a matter of choosing the right data type there. FME inherently doesn't know that a number is a percentage. So if your percentage calculation just gives you the decimal value, you're going to have to multiply it by 100. Hopefully that answers that. The memory issue, I think you probably need to take that up with either your local support or FME support, because that can be due to any number of things. It's usually just the size of the data and the kind of processing you're doing, whether you've got a lot of transformers that are blocking, so you're using a lot of caching or memory. So very hard for us online here to debug something like that, because you probably need to send in the log file that will give us a clue as to whereabouts that problem is starting to encounter. So a combination of the log file and the workbench is a good starting point.
Immediately on your end, you can try turning off the feature caching first and seeing if that improves things, because with feature caching, what it's doing is keeping a memory of each output from every transformer, and that takes a load on your system. So turn that off first, and then try to run it piecemeal. You can add data inspectors into your canvas to pinpoint where it might be slowing down the most. So that's something that you could possibly do on your end before you submit a case with your local support or with us, and that'll give us a little bit more details as well.
Thank you, Julieta. I will try that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on with us. We appreciate it. Some great questions there. And Jovita, I'll chat out a link. We did a webinar not too long ago on feature caching. So if anyone wants to learn more about that, Dave did cover when to use it and when not to use it. And this might be a good example of when not to use it. So I'll go ahead and chat out that link. And I'll also chat out a link to our safe.com/support. And like sometimes with these webinars, we find that we have issues that maybe it's not fast enough or like conducive enough to resolve on a webinar like this, but that's where that support page really comes in handy. So if you are running into anything problematic or a little more specific, definitely check out that link, and we have a ton of different resources and experts who can help you out on specific problems. Cool. All right, I see some more questions being typed in. I'm not sure, if Mark, if any of those questions are jumping out to you. Let's see.
I'm going to go back to the one that a follow-up one on the street addressing from Carol again. So in this case, the question is for street centerline segments, how can you tell the direction of the lines is consistent with the address range direction on the lines? So that's kind of tricky, because really you have to compare the adjacent lines and make sure they're all pointing in the same direction. So it's kind of a convoluted process to say, are all my lines pointing in the same direction? So really what you have to do is you have to extract the end coordinates of the lines with the coordinate, a couple of coordinate extractors. And then again, using that adjacent feature kind of thing that Chris was showing, you can build up some conditional statements that says, you know, do my start and end coordinates match, as well as my address range greater or less than, and so on, and build up that logic there. So it's pretty tricky to do, but you should be able to do it. If you have trouble with that, you could send me a little example data set and we could try and work through it as a proof of concept. Mark, M-A-R-K, @safe.com.
I wonder if some topology building transformers may be helpful there as well. I know we have some articles. If you look up topology and filter for articles, there are some with from and to lines. I think they were like transportation kind of examples, but those might be helpful for directional lines and then comparing those.
Wait, Mark, your email is just mark@safe.com? You got the official Mark name?
The original Mark.
The original Mark. That's awesome.
OG Mark@safe.com.
Yes. Oh my gosh, we should change it to that. Sorry, it just takes us a little bit sometimes to read the questions.
Another domain. Yeah, it does. Yeah, and try and think of an answer as we're going.
Yeah.
Because some of these are tricky questions.
They're great questions.
So another domain validation question here. So I've got values. I need to validate values being read from an Excel spreadsheet against an asset management system domain value. So it's similar to the question that came up earlier about matching against domains in the GeoDatabase. So what would be the best way to go about this? So I think it might be a little easier than in a GeoDatabase because your asset management system might be a bit more of an open database. So you probably have those domain tables in just database tables as lookup tables. Oh,
I think Mark's audio cut out.
Yes, Mark, what happened? Hang on here. Your audio's gone. Oh, he's muted. How did that happen? Okay, I'm gonna unmute you. Sorry, Mark, you got cut off.
Okay, so where did I get cut off? I'll just start again.
Yeah, you pretty early.
Need to validate values being read from an Excel spreadsheet against an asset management system domain values. What would be the best way? So it's very similar to the question about the GeoDatabase domains, but if it is an asset management system, it's probably in a more open database. So those domain lists are probably in a table somewhere that you might be able to access. Your DBA might not give you access to them, so in that case, you might have to just ask them to extract it to another spreadsheet, and then you can use something like the database joiner to just match them and do lookups on that.
Yeah, and I think just adding in on that as well, with the attribute validator, if you have the names of all of the values in a single list, just comma separated, you could do a validation for if the value's in that range. So you could kind of check that way, and it'll tell you if it matches or not. You'll get a bit more of an informative error message that way.
One step before that, in order to get that list of aggregated names, you can use the aggregator and have it concatenate with the comma between them. So that's how you can get started there.
Mm-hmm. Right, what one's next?
That's a good question.
Okay, I think, Javita, you going to ask one there?
Sure, there's one that sparks joy. I don't know if I can answer it fully, but I can maybe get you started. And that's any tips on manipulating 3D mesh data, wondering how to smooth or set polygon normals on a mesh. In terms of smoothing, there is a mesh simplifier. Sometimes if you find that there are particular issues in the mesh, it's possible to deaggregate to the polygon level and work with that. As for setting polygon normals, when you get to that polygon level, I believe there is a planar filter. Let me see. Planarity filter.
I'm just adding them as you're talking as well.
Awesome.
They can see Workbench.
And I'm not very familiar with this transformer, but this would be a good place to start. Dave knows a lot more about this transformer than I do, but if you get to this point and have any more questions, don't hesitate to post in the community for more help. But I think this could be a good place to start for that. So kind of to recap, it's like a mesh simplifier and the deaggregating to a point that you get to polygons, and then you can also use the mesh simplifier as well as the planarity filter.
A question like that is a really great question to pop up onto the community. If that doesn't answer your question, the community, there's so many people who work in those specific domains on a day-to-day basis, more than sometimes we do. And so very good conceptual questions. Has anybody done this before? Up on the community is a great way to get an answer. Lots of bright people answering questions on the community, other users particularly. This is a tricky one. How to validate feature counts between two sources. I'm not quite sure whether that means I've got two data sources and I want to make sure that they have the same number of features in, or whether that's for I've read this amount of data and I want to make sure I wrote the same number of features. But either way, it's a little tricky.
I think if it's the latter half, though, you could either look through the log or just use a feature writer to get it that way, right? Because that'll give you a summary attribute of how many features were written out.
Sometimes FME does lie. Particularly writing to databases. So if it's databases you're working with, then actually we have a webinar on this somewhere. It's probably a webinar around databases, which we'd have to dig out. But one of the tricks there is to move your workflow from using traditional readers and writers to using the two transformers that also read and write data, to the feature reader and the feature writer. Chris is popping those up there. So and Chris, maybe just pop up a conventional reader as well, any format.
Sure. Oops.
Because when Chris pops up a traditional format there, you can see that you get a feature type come in there of something.
Oh, sorry. Let me do that with
bad data. But anyway.
Oh, it's fine. There we go. I'll just put it in a single merge feature type instead of having a bunch pop up.
A traditional reader, you can see you can't do anything in front of that reader. And the same with the writer, you can't do anything after a traditional feature type on a traditional reader. Whereas the feature reader and the feature writer, they're transformers, so you can do other work within your workflow before and after. So if you're dealing with databases, what you could do is you could pop down something like a SQL executor and do a query to your database and say how many features are in this, how many records are in this table. And then when you write your features out, you could do the same afterwards. Once all the features are written, you could pop down a SQL executor after the feature writer has completed its work and then do a query and say how many records are in the target database. And that would tell you whether they matched or not. Hopefully that's a start to answering that question. And another good question here around schemas again is how to update schema changes, like fields added or dropped or renamed in a, say, a GeoDatabase or a database. So we did a webinar on that, Stephanie, the schema drift webinar.
We sure did.
So that would be a good, so that sort of talked about that concept of what happens as the, and that's a term apparently common in the database and ETL world, which we don't use that much here at Safe, but the idea of schema drift. So what happens when the schema changes under your feet and you've got a workflow designed to deal with a particular number of attributes or whatever. And so that webinar talks about that, how you can look for schema drift using some of the tools in FME, and the other tool that's coming in that I mentioned earlier on, the schema scanner, will also help with that. So, but yeah, that's in beta releases or right now. But also on that feature reader that Chris had up earlier on, there is an output port there that tells you what the schema is on the feature. Comes in as kind of an awkward list, but you can then manipulate that list and it'll tell you what attributes you've got and so on. So that's probably CAD file probably isn't the best example.
Yeah, not the best one, but
what's going on there. So that's and there are actually also readers. There's a reader called Schema Any Format, and it will also dig out the schema for you that you can poke around and look at, and then compare the source and target, and or compare today's schema with yesterday's schema and see if it's changed. So that was talked about in that webinar, the schema drift webinar.
I know one of the solutions that that webinar touched on and offered for schema drift is to like build dynamic workflows to like enable you to automatically handle schema drift. So I will chat out a link to a knowledge tutorial that can teach you how to do that if you find that is a common issue that you're facing.
Kind of along, we've got lots of other good questions here, but this one's just come up. So because it's again related to schema while we're on that topic. So might be an obvious question, which is always good to ask, but what is the best way to test an attribute type and then convert it if needed? Well, Chris showed the attribute validator, so it'll tell you what data type you have. But the other interesting thing about FME, in most cases, we don't really care what the data type is. And what dictates the data type really is how you define the attributes on the target writer. So when you're in there in your feature type definitions, that's great, Chris. Yeah, you know, depending on the format will dictate the kind of data types you can work with. But it's that really dictates what data type is going to get written out. So if you happen to have a string data type in your source data, but is actually just numeric values, then if you set that target to an integer or numeric or whatever it is, when FME writes it out, it will do that conversion for you. I think that's probably the best way to handle that.
And just kind of as I was kind of describing, driving the screen here while Mark was talking, one of the things you might have noticed is I added that writer feature type, sorry, as a manual attribute definition. So even though I've connected it up, we know there's attributes on this. If I drop down this to show all the attributes on the writer, nothing's there at the moment. So if I open it up and go to that user attributes tab, when you have it manually defined, you need to type all of these in, or if you want to do a quick trick, just click it as automatic. That's going to detect everything that's connected to that writer feature type. You'll see that in most cases, it's going to keep almost everything as a string unless it knows that it came in through a reader and nothing changed in the workspace. But then if you do need to change it, just toggle it back to manual. Here you can then remove any attributes you need if you want to. Do that in Attribute Manager as well, but mainly this is where you'll update those data types. So it's kind of a neat little trick is if you ever make a mistake or if you know that you need almost all of those attributes, just toggle it from automatic to manual. It'll bring everything up and then you can remove, change the data types and the cell width, for example, as you need.
One thing I would add is for types, if you for some reason need to change a data type in your workflow, Attribute Manager, in the Attribute Manager or types like that, you can go into the edit value, and there are some functions to be able to sort of typecast. So if you absolutely need something to be a float or if you need to round it, you can go into the open text editor and then browse through the different functions that you need. I don't know if it's like a string or a math function.
I think it might be, oh, sorry, I think it might be math.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's things like double, int, and yeah, that's if you need to cast the values.
And Greg says, I use Chris's tip all the time. So that's good.
It's great. I'm not the only one. Good to know.
Do a webinar like that, Steph.
Just general usability. Yeah, it's honestly a great one because even when you're kind of messing around and working with stuff, like I do this when I work with Salesforce stuff because I need to make sure it matches. I'll be going through here and I don't want to use an attribute manager because it's not in the workspace. I'll just manage the schema in the writer feature type and I'll accidentally delete a couple at a time and it's like, oh man, I didn't mean to do that and I've already accepted it. So I can just go back in there really easily, hit automatic, and everything's back to what it was, back to the way it was. So it's really great trick.
Very cool. Okay, I'm thinking we'll leave this open for like another, or we can answer questions for another 3 minutes here. But we usually like to end our meetings at SAFE. We have like an internal kind of policy. I don't know, policy is not the right word because it sounds so formal, but we like to end things about 5 minutes early just to give people some time back in their day and a chance to go and grab a snack before their next meeting. So we'll try and do that here. But get your last questions in. This will kind of be the last call for questions then. And of course, if there are more questions, we will stay on, but we will try and give people a chance to get some time back in their day.
And if we didn't get to it on the air and you did send it in, we will do our best to send you an email with the response as well. Obviously, this webinar was driven by you guys, so thank you so much for submitting all your questions. So yeah, let us know if you have any other ones coming in. Any last ones that kind of stand out to anyone?
Somebody's asking here, is it possible to read and write to the same file GeoDatabase?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so it should be just as easy as adding the reader to the canvas. You can either just drag the GeoDatabase in and then type GeoDatabase, put the GeoDatabase writer on the canvas. It'll be as easy as that. If you're working with things like sometimes databases, anything that has like a file lock on it, sometimes you need to make sure that the file is going to close before you start writing to it. So you need to make sure that everything has been read in from the file's closed from the reading before you start writing it. And the easiest way to do that is using a blocking transformer called the feature holder. You don't necessarily have to do this in every workspace, but the easiest way to do it is just use that feature holder. It's just going to simply, actually, I'll add one more to the canvas just so we can see it. Put an attribute manager. So when I hit run here, you're going to notice everything, all the numbers are going to start tallying up right before that feature holder. Hit the play button, and nothing's going to advance until the whole file has been read in. So that's going to be a great tip and for anyone who's working with anything with a file lock or a GeoDatabase, a database. If you're running into those file lock errors in the canvas or in the translation log, just put a feature holder down or something that blocks, and then it'll allow the file to close and then write it out.
And also, yes, if you have multiple inputs into the feature holder, it will wait for all of the features to come in before letting it go.
Mm-hmm. And I think we've mentioned blocking transformer as well a couple of times here. So I'm just going to add an aggregator down to the canvas really quickly, just so we can explain what that is. So almost I want to say it's almost every transformer has this group processing option. So you can notice if you enable that group processing, there's a group by mode, and you'll see it says blocking. So it's going to process it at the end. That's going to allow all the features to come into the transformer, then do the grouping, and then kick them out. There's also, so that's the default one. There's also one called process when group changes. So when something changes, this is great for the data streaming, which is kind of a new feature with FME Server. If you need the features to go through once the group changes, that's when you kind of change it to this one. But I think there's a whole tutorial series and knowledge articles and everything for that if you are interested in streaming or stream processing. So we won't really dive into that. But that's kind of the difference between blocking transformers and when you're just running them as normal.
Awesome. Yeah, we actually have an upcoming webinar on stream processing, Introduction to Data Stream Processing. So that is coming up on August 24th. And if you want to learn more about what stream processing is, how you can get started with it, that's going to be a really great place to come.
You kind of get the sense that we have a lot of webinars.
We have a lot of webinars. Okay.
Great.
All right. Well, I'm thinking, yeah, what do you guys think? Feel like you covered most things, most of the questions here and things about data validation? Yeah, maybe just that resource page there, Chris, is good. We will chat out a link to the recording and slides, and this slide is going to be included. But you can see, like, if you just search on safe.com for like data QA or data validation, you're going to be able to find all of these really easily. So that would be my biggest advice is if you have a question about data validation, definitely go to safe.com and just type it in the search bar, and you're going to get hit with even more resources than is on this slide deck.
And then don't hesitate to ask a question on the community. You can answer them as well, but if you have a question.
And our live chat tool as well. So there's lots of different resources that you have at your disposal. When in doubt, ask, because someone else is probably in the same position, and it's going to benefit everyone by getting the answer out there. So.
Yeah, that's such good advice for sure. So I just chatted a link out to the community. If anyone is new, you can go and get an account there. It's such a great place to be. Highly recommend it for all things FME. Okay, there's a wasp out here now, so I think that's our cue to wrap it up. Thank you all so much for attending today. Like we said, you don't have to wait for another one of these webinars to ask us questions. You can find us on live chat at safe.com or in the community. But if you do want to wait for a webinar, go to safe.com/webinars, and we have so many up and coming, and we can see you at the next event. But thank you, Chris, Jovita, and Mark. That was great.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
All right. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye.